Hi Zach, this is Liv. I wanted to do this for a long time, so I have the opportunity finally, and it's for you. So this is a simultaneous translation of a novel that I wrote called The Way of Control. Control is written as CNTRL, so the vowels are missing. I hope you listen to this before you go to sleep, or maybe in between sleep, so going in and off. So, the way of control. His parents called him every day, first his father and second his mother. To see how he was, his father asked him what he had for breakfast, and then his mother called him again and told him something familiar. Generally, that Aunt Beryl had been grandma again. She was regularly a grandmother. He felt bewildered by what his parents were doing, and he called his parents secretly the Mind Police. Owners of a print shop, they had transmitted love for printed papers, and he had become a very, very bad science fiction writer. At home, there were many papers that he kept one over another one until by addition it became a small sculpture. And when he was a kid, his parents were doing that already. They collected sheets of paper that they impiled one over another one by sizes. They could be A4, A5, or A3, and some of them were blank. When the pile of paper reached a considerable height, like 50 centimeters, the equivalent of a baby's height, they kept the whole pile into a wooden paper package and they left it in the same place it was born. Next to the other objects they also had on the floor. The house habit was not to have shelves or storage. They put chandeliers, dishes, and non-perishing food boxes inside some kind of anonymous cardboard boxes collection that closed looked like other sculptures, and by general they had no name, and since they were shoes, no image at all. Like the only thing that was matter for them was to have money, and since they were doing a lot of it, they hide it in electricity takes that they unscrewed carefully in order to hide the dollars rolls and then rescrewed carefully. At home, they would unscrew everything that could be taken advantage somehow else. The concept of the mind police was born when he was a kid and didn't apply only to his parents, but to a biblical world identical to the present but slightly moved in its own capacity to be baroque, and maybe because of Judaism, extraterrestrial superstition, or his way of not seeing. He insisted in ideas such as the reverse of things, talked about a mattress of pain, and dynamic diaspora. He had a foreign girlfriend with whom he lived. She was Swedish or something like that. He didn't know if she was Norwegian or Finnish, or if the girl's parents were and she was born in Stockholm. He didn't understood so well. He didn't know what she was doing in Argentina neither, but she spoke pretty well Spanish and he was very much in love. They made love very often, and when she was not there because she had gone to her home country to visit family, he made love to a ghost that he called Aura and was like the residue of the Swedish. To make love to Aura, he had to focus really hard and wait, sitting in a giant pillow, that some symptom of desire manifests. Then, when he identified it, and it could be anything, a branch falling far away, a very, very high pitched sound, a neighbor's flute, steps in the stairway, or his deck becoming hard, he started work and masturbated, frictioning his penis against a hot light source that could be a closed lamp. He was rubbing the lamp screen against his penis until a light exploded before his eyes. He got burned and he got the impression that the very blonde hair caressed his face. The blonde part was his imagination because he wouldn't see it. His eyes were closed. After that, Aura's materiality transfixed him. He had a very dense body and very hard to describe because it was like a giant square but sexy. It was flat but it had its own depth, and he imagined it dark with a very blonde hair, although he never saw it. It is true that it could be transparent, but he thought, or he liked to think, of ghosts as black squares, insistent shapes that would take place behind him every time desire manifested. In his free times, that were plenty, he watched a very, very large house full with locked keys. He was in charge of keeping the doors under lock and to avoid homeless people getting in. And these homeless were waiting in the backyard and the patio of the house. And he didn't know why the doors every now and then would open again and some other homeless guy appeared inside that he had to kick out at the same time that he was insulted by the house owners who considered him a justified useless. Then he would walk around the empty spaces again, opening and closing locked doors while he controlled that the patio was full of homeless people again. And that's how he spent his time, kicking out imaginary homeless from a symbolic house that he walked around, finding new rooms every time. He wrote poems too. The poems were very bad, but they were long, romantic. In the beginning, he collaborated with a scientific magazine called El Camino, which means the way, that looked religious but was actually about extraterrestrial cases. In there, he had insisted with the mind police concept, but then he got fired because he wasn't able to provide sources, even imaginary. His stories in the magazine weren't going further than 2 lines. They were like small paranoid lines. After he got fired, he couldn't collaborate in any other magazine. He turned freelance and he published in his parents' print shop his own El Camino that were parallel magazines of El Camino, and nobody cared, not even the publishers of El Camino. He liked to do as if he was in some other plan of Judaism. For example, for some text, he wouldn't use vowels of words as if it was a Semite language and vowels were interchangeable. He liked to write long prophetic poems with carved patterns, and sometimes it was like this. So, hoy, antes del amanecer, voy con vos sin ACB, sin día, son hoy los profetas del sur, el del sur, sin ser, sin voz, del sur. He kept on with the magazine for a few years. The Swedish didn't know what he was doing, and he was a happy man. One night, he dreamed that to escape from an impertinent Catholic manifestation, he had to hide in a shitty hostel called the Mech. The rooms were all empty. Under the yellow light, there was a one-sized bed, and he was proposed a job as a maid. Apparently, he accepted it just to spend time, but actually, he needed the money. More than a maid, he was like an universitarian professor who knew everything about Islam. Night went through flying, and instead of waking up at 7 in the morning, he woke up at 7 in the afternoon. The riot was still on and wasn't finished yet, and the hostel was now full of little tiny rooms for rooms where in a straight line were impiled geometrically some conic hooded penitents. On the side it looked like an army of triangles. On the side it looked like an army of triangles. The chests were all naked and muscled. The heads were all covered with hoods. The penitents whipped themselves with multiple tails belts, and they did that for hours in order manner. He looked at them fascinated. When he woke up, not only he knew everything about Islam, but also he was convinced that he had to write the way of control. It was like a book that was at the same time like the Bible, that was at the same time like an identical system to the one of the 1001 Nights, but in relation to what he believed could be doubled in society. It was like a prophet Bible with no prophecy, some kind of identical system to the one we live on, but slightly unshaped. He didn't know very well how to do it. Basically, he had to name everything again, explain the origin of things very, very well, further in reality. A geometric origin, maybe, some repetition island, going through past lives, futures. He didn't care. Life, if it wasn't in order to reveal the origin of its own. He looked around. The room was full of useless objects, half trash that he bought in New York, and he put everything in a brown box. He liked to pretend as if he understood a system of signs that were planted there specifically for him to reorganize an idyllic lecture of cosmos, more of himself, identical to the pre-existing one, but more focused on him. So then vacuum machine cleaners, the tubes that came out of the roofs, the two eyes painted in the sign of uniformes escolares, made him recreate a private system. The tubes looked like the Swedish legs, so thin, like water tubes. Then he ran his finger for these legs and for the water tubes and went out to the street and caressed the tubes that were hanging on the metro station and the lasers on the university walls, and the whole world was a cake of erotism. Soul was structured like a marriage cake, tall, 6 foot tall. Besides knowing everything about Islam, he didn't know what to do. He went out to the street, and the first thing he saw was a car whose patent wrote KGB. The control in Soviet Union remind him the mind police, and thinking in the police remind him more mind police that, between other things, were his own parents. He took the decision of writing the whole way of control without using vowels, now that he knew that he himself was a mixture of Judaism and some other Semite writing. He walked down the street, head down, and he sat to wait. He was a bohemian. He found himself next to dog shit, and he started caressing its contours that were snaking up in the shape of a spiral. Before starting to write, he had to enter the house that he regularly protected from homeless people that were um, on a pile in the patio. His hands were dirty with caca, so he entered the house, cleaning his hands against the walls. His employees were going to kill him, but he didn't mind. He had to kick off the homeless people that were already on a pile on the backyard, and one was already in the first room and started caressing and touching the portraits. And he kicked him out while he was key locking every doors in the house, one after another one, and one of them were open again, and he had to close them back relentlessly. And then he came back to the street. He was in Corrientes y Estado de Israel. He went through a pharmacy, a herboristery, a pharmacy again, a kiosk. He went through a Dr. Simla pharmacy, a clothes shop, a pharmacy, a naturist grocery store, a pharmacy, a telecommunication shop, a pharmacy, a Burger King, a clothes store, a house store, a Home Depot, and a pharmacy. The first idea of the way of control, he had it already. He'd seen some humidity stains in the subway wall. Also, somebody had given him a little stamp that was actually a card. The card said, "Real love has no end, has no happy ending. Real love has no happy ending." And down there, it just has no end. Instead of making him happy, it horrified him, because the people who loved him the most in the world were his parents. The way of control was so well structured as a colony of ants, or the French educative system. It was indestructible, and even if it wasn't being written all the time, it flowed like parallel life behind him. It was like his shadow. He thought that he could feel the way of control growing bigger and smaller and expanding like universe itself. And he didn't need to write it anymore, because it was a permanent precognition. It was everybody's secret power, the sense the dogs are born with in order to dig in the earth. And it was so well argued, like pharmaceutical industry, and had so much symbolic anchoring, like the value of money in a underdeveloped country. It was stable. It had educative system, inner elections, social security. He understood that his parents' love had no ending. So far, his parents' life had no ending. So his parents were going to live forever. He was more and more anxious. He became nervous. How could he fight the mind police? The KGB were waiting. The parents were around. The mind police called him every day. He invented a series of science fiction ideas on ascendancy of lives in spiral for the first story of The Way of Control, and he invented a perfect system in which police were annihilated by the same police that was born over and over before starting controlling mutually minds. I mean, the cycle of sons and parents, but upside down. In this case, it would be the sons controlling the parents' minds when they themselves stopped being the sons and became the parents of their parents. The way of control was relieved. It had started to be written, although it wasn't necessary to write it. The different revelations would make him fat. Himself was smiling, relieved. He thought he was blessed by police. He closed his eyes.